Hi, welcome to the Binge on Self-Love podcast. My name is Anna, but you can call me Anci, and I'm your host. Thank you so much for joining me today, whether this is your first time you're listening to this podcast or you've listened to it before. Welcome or welcome back, and thank you so much for joining. I hope you're doing really well, and let's get into today's episode. Because for today, I've decided to share with you a few things that has made a huge difference on my journey to building self-discipline. If you've listened to the Binge on Self-Love podcast, you've probably noticed that I've mentioned I've been struggling with procrastination, severe procrastination problems, as well as with binge eating disorder and with a really negative approach, not just towards my body, but towards myself in general. Self-discipline is something I've tried to work on for a really long time, for a majority of my life, I would say, but not really intensively, if I'm being honest, but more so that at different occasions, I would come across me not having enough self-discipline and then failing in certain things and then being upset with myself and not being sure what can I do to change that. But in the past few years, and most specifically in the past few months, I feel like I've been able to do a really significant progress when it comes to self-discipline. And when I was thinking about it, I've realized there are probably 2 or 3 main things that helped me to change my attitude towards not just self-discipline, but towards my responsibility towards myself. But don't get me wrong, self-discipline is still something that I struggle with. Self-discipline is still something that I know I need to do a lot of work, and it is something that I'm working on almost every day. So I thought it would be fun to share with you a few things that I personally found really helpful and that became some sort of like a game changer, as much as I hate this buzzword. So without further ado, let's get into today's episode. Hi there, my name is Anna, but you can call me Anci, and I'm a host of the Binge on Self-Love podcast. If this is your first time listening, welcome and thank you so much for being here. And if you've tuned in before, it's great to have you back. Binge on Self-Love podcast started with me in my bedroom, recording and sharing my journey with binge eating disorder and with procrastination. But we are so much more than our eating disorder, and we are so much more than our problems. So this podcast is essentially about accepting yourself and everything that comes with it. Growth, pain, relationships, boundaries, habits, comparison, body image, confidence, you name it. Plus, you'll catch me having some insightful conversations with fantastic guests who open up and share their stories. So make sure to subscribe to the Binge on Self-Love on your favorite platform and join me every Tuesday for a brand new episode. Binge on Self-Love podcast is intended for informational purposes only. It doesn't provide professional medical advice, and it is not a substitute for diagnosis or treatment. So let me start by saying that self-discipline has been a topic in my life for many, many years. Like I've said, I've been struggling with procrastination for many, many years. And by many, many years, I mean like ever since I was in high school 15 years ago, and probably even before that, I remember procrastinating. I've spent a lot of time thinking about willpower and self-discipline and procrastination and how these things are intertwined and why I don't have or why I don't feel like I have a willpower or self-discipline and why I cannot get these things done and why I cannot move forward in certain things. I think I've been trying to find an answer for that for a really long time, but I finally feel like in the past few years and especially in the past few months, I've done a really significant progress when it comes to self-discipline. I know that there are certain things that I started to do differently than I was doing before, and I'm pretty sure that those are the things that made the biggest difference. The first thing that I started doing is to be brutally honest with yourself. And now before you turn this podcast off thinking like it's one of those people, hear me out. For years, I was trying to come up with different explanations and different excuses for why certain things don't work out in my life. Why do I struggle with studying? Why do I struggle with working on my podcast? Why do I struggle to do pretty much anything? Why do I feel all these negative emotions when I try to do something that's out of my comfort zone? Why do I struggle so much to do something so simple? I would always come up with a different excuse. And I'm not saying that some of those explanations couldn't be true, but most of the time what I was doing was that I was sugarcoating things for myself and I was excusing myself. I was excusing my lack of self-discipline and my lack of effort and my lack of responsibility for myself and accountability for myself by all of these different excuses and explanations that I came up with. But at one point, I caught myself thinking like, it's not possible that every couple of weeks or months you come up with a different excuse why you can't do the same thing. Like if I take the workout example, at one point I would be too demotivated, at some point I would be too tired, at some point I would feel like I don't deserve to work out, at one point it would be my lack of time, then it would be a lack of energy, it would be so many different things. And it made me think like, maybe it's none of these excuses. Maybe I'm just really lazy and it's time to admit to myself. Admitting to myself something so uncomfortable really made the difference. Because if you keep sugarcoating things for yourself, if you keep lying to yourself, you will always come up with another excuse. Why postpone doing something for later, or why not do it at all? Nobody likes to hear that they suck at something or that they are lazy or that there's just something else. But it is actually really important. And I'm not saying to be mean to yourself or to say to yourself something in a negative way. No, not at all. But the point is to be really honest with yourself. Honest to a point where it makes you uncomfortable because you are facing the reality of it. Because when I told myself that maybe I don't want to work out because I'm just really lazy, suddenly there's no space for excuses. There's just reality that I can now work with much better than with some stupid excuse that I would make up every couple of weeks. And like I've said, it's not comfortable. It's not something we want to do. I don't want to admit to myself that I'm lazy because I would much rather be a hardworking person. Being really honest to a point where it's kind of uncomfortable because you have to really be honest with yourself really made the difference. I've recently read a book by David Goggins, so maybe that made the difference in my mindset as well. Another example that I'm going to give you is money, my relationship with money. I've talked about this on this podcast as well, but let's say I've been trying to reach certain financial goals that I would set for myself. And that's like to spend a certain amount of money every month and save a certain amount of money every month. But what I would do is that I would set a goal and then I would just spend money like I had no goals and no budget. Then by the end of the month, I would start to feel this anxiety and that feeling that you've probably done something that you told yourself you wouldn't, and now you didn't really want to face the consequences. So instead of reflecting on it, I would just go another few months before I took a look at the spreadsheet that I've made with the budget. And again, it's like one of those excuses that I've kept telling myself and lying to myself that, okay, so I fit into that budget, who knows? I won't rather check, it doesn't matter really. And when you keep telling yourself these things, then of course you're not going to reach your goals or reach your budget because you are not honest with yourself. So what I do now instead is that every month, no matter how much money I've spent, I go to my spreadsheet and I write everything down and I face it. No matter how uncomfortable it is, I am being honest with yourself. Even if I crossed my budget for 5%, 50%, it doesn't matter. I am doing it for myself, so I better be honest with myself. So the important outcome of being honest with yourself is that by being honest with yourself, you're giving yourself a chance to do those things differently, to really try and solve the problem that is lying in front of you. If you're avoiding things because you're lazy, there are things you can do with it. If you're spending more money than you should every month, there are certain things you can do about it when you're honest with yourself. As much as uncomfortable it can be to admit to yourself, it is something you can work with. Another thing that really made a difference for me is that I started setting goals in a different way. What I would do for many, many years is that I would set a goal and then I would pretty much never look at them until the end of the year. And then by the end of the year, when I look at them, I would be really surprised and upset that I didn't reach pretty much any of them. If I was really lucky, I reached like one goal by accident maybe. And I would get really frustrated with myself thinking, how is it that I never reach my goals? And of course, you're not going to reach your goals if you don't even know what those goals are, or you have some general knowledge of them, but you don't really do anything to make those things happen. So what I've been trying now for a past few months is that at the beginning of the year, I set myself a certain goals. And what I do now is that I go week by week and I write down each week what I am going to do to kind of achieve those goals. To be more specific, let's say that I want to be consistent with my workouts, which is like a very general example that a lot of people can relate to. Let's say I want to work out 4 times a week. So instead of just setting that goal at the beginning of the year and then by the end of the year thinking like, how much did I actually work out? What I do now is that I incorporate these goals into every week. So I take my weekly planner and I make sure that I found 4 days of that week when I can work out. Of course, there are days or weeks when I cannot work out, so maybe it's like 2 workouts or even 1, but that's fine. That's like what I do on a weekly basis to make sure that I get closer to my goal as much as possible. The same with this podcast. Instead of just like wishing to reach certain numbers by the end of the year, I make sure to dedicate a certain amount of time each week to my podcast, to do things that I said I will do. Maybe it sounds too simple to be true, but I find it extremely helpful. I'm able to really see how I'm progressing each week. So setting your goals the right way and then really incorporating them to your weekly schedule is another thing that I found really helpful in terms of building self-discipline. This leads me to my third point, the final point that makes another big difference in my self-discipline building journey, and that's to iterate. Iterate, iterate, iterate. This perfectly follows up on my previous point, because now when I am setting my goals for each week to reach some final bigger goal at the end of the year or at the end of the month or whatever, I am now much more able to react to things that are happening in my life in real time. For example, if I have a goal that I want to read a book every week, I have my weekly planner and I can actually track if I'm able to read a book every week. And if not, then I'm able to iterate and say, maybe this is too much of a big goal for me right now. I don't have that much time, or I am not really that interested in reading right now. So what about reading one book every 2 weeks or 3 weeks or every month? And I'm doing exactly that with all of my goals and taking all of my goals and making sure that they work in a way that my schedule is set right now. There are some days when I get home much later than I expected, and I need to take some things off of my list and either push them for another day or maybe not do them that week. But I also need to reflect that on the upcoming weeks so that I am still able to achieve my goals. And I found this really, really helpful in terms of building my self-discipline, because I finally feel like I have some sort of control in things actually happening and me doing those things that I said I would do. Oftentimes we have a goal or a desire to do something, but life happens and maybe we have to get a new job or we're moving places and we don't have that much time or that much energy, or our priorities change. And you should be able to iterate and do these changes in your life, whether it works for you on a weekly basis, daily basis, monthly basis, whatever works for you. I found weekly planning to be perfectly suitable for me because it's not super small like planning every single day, but it's also not too big like a month where a lot of things can happen. So I find this really helpful. It's helping me to hold myself accountable. It's helping me to face the reality. It's helping me to remind myself the reason why I want to do it, the reality of the problems that I'm facing, like the laziness, the procrastination, all of that. These are the top 3 things that I found to make a biggest difference in my attempt to build self-discipline. So just to summarize it for you, it's to be brutally honest with yourself to a point where it's kind of uncomfortable to face the reality, but you are doing it for yourself. Number 2, it's setting your goals in a right way. And number 3, it's iterating. Iterate on your goals, iterate on your time availability, iterate on the priority of your goals. So these were things that I wanted to share with you today. I really hope to be progressing even more on my self-discipline journey. Also, I would very much like to know your feedback on today's episode, because this is the first episode where I didn't prepare a whole script that I would then read, but I am trying to make these episodes more flowy, like, if it makes sense, to make them more natural. And I only prepared a few points, so I would really like to know if you noticed any difference, if you like this episode more or less than the previous ones. So please let me know on Instagram at bingeonselflove, or send me an email at anci@bingeonselflove, or feel free to review this podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and let me know what you think. So that's all from me. Thank you so much for tuning in, and talk to you soon. Bye!